She has a good heart, but she's just a burden. I carry this whole house. When Alex Hartman whispered this to his business partners, he didn't realize the table microphone was still on, or that he had just signed his own financial death warrant. For Sanaa, that single word crossed the line. Alex thought she was helpless. He had no idea she was secretly guarding a $750 million empire. Watch how this burden quietly moves her millions, exposes his fraud, and cancels his entire life. But was her revenge justice or cruelty? Subscribe to watch the drama unfold and tell us in the comments, what would you do if you held the keys to the empire? The air inside Le Bernardin was always maintained at a temperature that suggested preservation, a crisp and sterile chill designed to keep the seafood fresh, and the clientele's composure frozen in a state of perpetual, high-stakes elegance. For Sanaa Ellington, seated at the edge of the expansive table like a decorative afterthought, the atmosphere felt less like fine dining and more like a surgical theater, where her dignity was being slowly excised, layer by layer, under the soft glow of amber lighting. She adjusted the napkin on her lap, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the silk, acutely aware that she was merely a prop in the grand production of Alex Hartman's life. A silent accessory chosen to soften the edges of his aggressive ambition with her quiet demeanor and faultless aesthetic. Beside her, Alex was in his element, radiating the frantic, chemically enhanced energy of a man desperate to close a deal that would salvage the teetering edifice of his reputation, his laughter booming a little too loudly as he poured another glass of vintage Cabernet for Damon Pierce, his business strategist whose eyes lingered on the waitstaff with predatory intent. When the sommelier approached, offering the leather-bound wine list to Sanaa with a deferential nod, Alex's hand shot out with the speed of a striking cobra, intercepting the interaction before she could even inhale to speak. "My wife doesn't concern herself with the complexities of the vintage," he announced, flashing a dazzling practice smile at the table that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes, dismissing her autonomy with a wave of his hand as he ordered for the table, selecting the heavy, bloody Wagyu for her, despite knowing her preference for the delicate Dover sole. An act of microaggression so routine it barely registered as a sting anymore. Sanaa watched the waiter retreat, her expression remaining a mask of practiced serenity, though beneath the surface, the tectonic plates of her patience were beginning to grind against each other, generating a heat that threatened to fissure the cool facade she had maintained for 3 years of marriage. The table was littered with the detritus of wealth, crystal stemware, silver cutlery, and the centerpiece of the evening, a sleek, black conference microphone system intended for the hybrid investors joining remotely, its small LED indicator glowing a dormant, benign green. The conversation shifted to the Hartman Urban Fund, Alex's voice taking on the cadence of a preacher selling salvation, weaving a tapestry of projected profits and architectural marvels, while Damon leaned in, his elbow resting heavily on the table, dangerously close to the control console of the microphone. Alex, fueled by the wine and the adrenaline of the pitch, leaned toward Damon, his posture slumping slightly as he dropped the veneer of the professional businessman to indulge in the crude camaraderie of the locker room. "Women in real estate, Damon," Alex chuckled, the sound wet and heavy, slapping Damon on the shoulder with a force that caused the other man's arm to slip, his elbow depressing the talk button with a sickening, audible click that turned the benign green light to a screaming, urgent red. Oblivious to the live feed now broadcasting his voice to every corner of the private dining room and the remote investors, Alex leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, slurry whisper that the high-fidelity audio system picked up and amplified with crystal clarity, booming through the ceiling speakers like the voice of a judgmental god. "Look at Sanaa," Alex sneered, the words echoing off the mahogany walls, distorting slightly with the feedback of his own arrogance. "Obedient, beautiful, but useless in these matters. She has a good heart, I'll give her that, but she's just a burden, you know? I'm the one carrying this whole house, from the grocery bills to the lipstick she's wearing." The silence that followed was absolute, a physical weight that crashed down upon the table, shattering the ambient hum of polite conversation and the clink of silverware. The word burden hung in the air, repeating in the stunned minds of the guests. A cruel indictment that stripped Sanaa naked before the city's elite. Sanaa didn't gasp, nor did she shrink away. Instead, her hands moved under the table, gripping the linen napkin with such ferocity that her knuckles turned the color of bone, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated fury against her ribs. Vivian, her mother-in-law, sat across from her face a mask of horrified realization that quickly reassembled itself into a rictus of damage control. "Oh, Alex is such a joker," Vivian shrilled, her voice shrill and brittle, cutting through the thick tension like a dull knife. "Sanaa, darling, smile, won't you? Don't look so dour. You're ruining the mood for everyone." But Sanaa did not smile, and the room remained frozen until the sharp, deliberate sound of a heavy crystal goblet hitting the table shattered the paralysis. Helena Rhodes, the matriarch of philanthropy, and the only person in the room whose net worth made Alex's look like pocket change, was staring not at Alex, but directly at Sanaa, her eyes narrowing with an intensity that felt like an X-ray. "Atlas also thought he was carrying the sky," Helena said, her voice dropping an octave, rich with the gravel of experience, ignoring Alex entirely as she addressed the silent woman beside him. "Until he realized he was just standing on the ground. Girl, are your shoulders tired?" The question hung there, an invitation and a challenge wrapped in a metaphor, piercing through the layers of gaslighting and manipulation that had cocooned Sanaa for years. Slowly, deliberately, Sanaa lifted her head, her eyes locking onto Helena's. The dullness of submission replaced by a glacial, terrifying clarity. She didn't look at Alex, who was now frantically tapping the microphone, realizing his catastrophic error. Nor did she look at Vivian, whose smile was trembling at the edges. "I am used to it," Sanaa replied, her voice soft but carrying a steel core that sliced through the lingering echoes of her husband's insult, addressing Helena with the poise of an equal. "The weight, I have found, does not come from the mass of the load, but from the realization that you have been carrying the wrong people." The drive home from Le Bernardin was a masterclass in suffocating luxury, the interior of the Mercedes S-Class sealing them in a capsule of scented leather and simmering aggression. Alex drove with a jerky, erratic rhythm that betrayed his fractured ego, accelerating too hard into the turns and braking late, the physical manifestation of a man trying to regain control over a world that had momentarily slipped from his grasp. Sanaa sat in the passenger seat, pressing her temple against the cool glass of the window, watching the blur of New York City streetlights streak by like comets, tailing into the darkness. She was physically present but spiritually miles away, observing the man beside her as if he were a specimen in a jar, analyzing the toxicity radiating from him in waves. "You embarrassed me back there," Alex finally snapped, breaking the heavy silence with a tone that suggested he was the victim of a great injustice. He didn't look at her, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road with a manic intensity. "Carrying the wrong people. Where did you even learn to speak like that? It was a joke, Sanaa. A joke. Men talk bad about their wives a little bit. It's a way of bonding. It's how business is done. You wouldn't understand because you've never had to survive in the Shark Tank." Sanaa remained silent, her eyes tracing the reflection of her own face in the darkened glass, a ghostly overlay on the passing city. In the reflection, she saw a stranger, a woman who had spent 3 years dimming her own light so her husband wouldn't be blinded. A woman who had curated a persona of harmless domesticity to soothe his fragility. Alex took her silence as submission, emboldened to dig the knife in deeper. "I don't know why I expect you to get it," he sneered, swerving around a taxi with a blast of the horn. "You've never earned a dime for this house. Do you think the lifestyle we have just happens? It comes from my stress. It comes from my tolerance. And tonight you made me look weak in front of Damon and Helena. You don't bring money to the table, Sanaa, so the least you can do is bring support." The words landed with a dull thud, but they no longer carried the sting of humiliation. Instead, they clarified everything, crystallizing the dynamic of their marriage into a single, undeniable truth. Inside her mind, a cold, calculating voice answered him, though her lips remained sealed. "You're right, Alex. I haven't earned a dime for this house," she thought, her gaze hardening. "Because my money is in a bracket you cannot even reach, let alone comprehend." She didn't speak, knowing that any defense she offered now would only be fuel for his gaslighting fire. So she let him fill the silence with his insecurities until they pulled into the driveway of the Hartman estate, a sprawling monument to leveraged debt and architectural pretension. Alex stormed into the house the moment the engine cut, heading straight for the study where the decanters of scotch waited to numb his bruised pride, leaving Sanaa to lock the car and walk into the foyer alone. She didn't follow him. The time for playing the consoling wife was over. Instead, she ascended the grand staircase, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble, moving past the master bedroom and down the hall to a small, unassuming door that Alex believed was merely storage for her sentimental clutter and off-season wardrobe. It was the one room in the house he never entered, dismissing it as irrelevant to his grand design. Inside, the space was a stark contrast to the Baroque excess of the rest of the mansion. It was minimalist, climate-controlled, and terrifyingly organized. This was her command center. Sanaa locked the door behind her, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place with a sound of finality. She moved to the wall behind a row of winter coats, pushing aside a panel to reveal a biometric safe. She placed her thumb on the scanner, the mechanism whirring softly before the heavy steel door swung open, revealing the physical proof of the life she had kept hidden. Inside lay the documents of the Ellington Reserve, a diverse portfolio built from the tragic, substantial settlement from her parents' fatal accident and an early intuitive investment in a tech startup that had since become a global unicorn. She pulled the files onto the desk, the numbers staring back at her in black and white. $750 million. It wasn't just savings. It was an empire of liquidity and assets, managed with a prudence Alex couldn't fathom. But tonight, she wasn't looking at the balance for comfort. She was looking for a weapon. She sat down, the ergonomic chair supporting a posture that had shifted from slumped resignation to executive rigidity, and picked up her encrypted phone. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m., but she knew Daniel wouldn't be asleep. She dialed. The line clicked open on the first ring, the background noise suggesting the hum of a server room or the quiet focus of a late-night law office. "Sanaa?" Daniel Cho's voice was crisp, laced with a mixture of concern and readiness, as if he had been sitting by the phone waiting for this specific call for 3 years. "It's late. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," Sanaa replied, her voice devoid of the tremor that had been there during the dinner. "But I'm done." "Done?" Daniel asked, the sound of typing already audible in the background. "He called me a burden, Daniel, in front of everyone. He thinks he's carrying me." She reached out and touched the stack of documents, grounding herself in the reality of her power. "I need you to check the Hartman Urban Fund. I need to know the exposure." "Sanaa," Daniel hesitated, the typing stopping for a brief second. "You know the protocol. If I start digging into Alex's financials with the authorization keys you have, I won't stop. I will pull every thread. This is the nuclear option." "Dig," Sanaa commanded, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any scream. "Dig until you hit the bottom. He called me a burden. I want to know exactly who is carrying whom." There was a moment of silence on the line, followed by the furious clatter of a keyboard as Daniel executed the search commands he had likely prepared months ago. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the only sound in the room being the rhythmic breathing of a woman waking up from a long, induced coma. "My God," Daniel whispered, his professional demeanor cracking. "Sanaa, are you looking at the shared drive? I'm sending a secure link now." Sanaa tapped the tablet on her desk, opening the file Daniel pushed through. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, the columns of debt, and the collateral agreements. "What am I looking at?" "It's not just the spending," Daniel explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Alex has been leveraging implied spousal assets. He's created a structure called an honorary guarantee. He hasn't touched your money directly because he can't access it, but he's been selling your name. He's telling the banks that the Ellington estate is the unspoken safety net for his high-risk loans. He's trading on your creditworthiness, Sanaa. He's using you as a human shield for his bankruptcy." Sanaa stared at the screen, the realization washing over her like ice water. The burden comment wasn't just an insult, it was a projection. He needed her to be the burden so no one would look closely enough to see that she was actually the pillar keeping the roof from collapsing on his head. He sold me, she whispered, the betrayal tasting metallic in her mouth. He didn't just marry me, he securitized me. If the Hartman Urban Fund fails, Daniel continued, the creditors could try to pierce the corporate veil and come after you, arguing you were a knowing participant because your digital signature is on these intent to support documents. Sanaa, did you sign these? Sanaa zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of a document dated 3 weeks prior. It was a perfect replica of her handwriting, a digital forgery executed with terrifying precision. No, she said, her voice turning to stone. I didn't. Then we have him, Daniel said, but we have to move fast before the banks call the loans. Do it, Sanaa said, reaching for the ring on her finger, twisting it but not taking it off. Not yet. She needed to wear it a little longer, like a spy wearing the uniform of the enemy. Freeze everything, Daniel, but do it quietly. I want him to think he's still in charge until the floor falls out from under him. The forensic dissection of the digital trail conducted by Daniel Cho revealed that the forgery was not merely a crime of desperate opportunity, but a systemic, architectural dismantling of her financial identity, orchestrated by the chaotic, bourbon-soaked ambition of Damon Pierce. Daniel had uncovered a labyrinth of shell companies and shadow agreements where Damon, acting as the unchecked ID to Alex's fragile ego, had leveraged Sanaa's credit rating as the bedrock for high-risk speculative loans that were currently teetering on the brink of catastrophic default. The realization that her husband had not only betrayed her, but had outsourced the execution of that betrayal to a man who treated women like disposable accessories ignited a cold, hard resolve within Sanaa that burned away the last lingering traces of sentimental hesitation. She understood that to extricate herself and her $750 million from this tangled web without alerting the spiders, she could not simply flee. She had to walk directly into the center of the trap and dismantle it from the inside, playing the role of the oblivious, submissive wife one final, devastating time. The setting for this performance was the Hartman Estates drawing room, a space suffocated by velvet drapes and the cloying scent of fresh lilies, where Vivian Hartman held court over afternoon tea like a monarch presiding over a crumbling empire. Sanaa sat on the edge of a Louis XIV chair, her posture perfect, pouring Earl Grey into porcelain cups so thin they felt as if they might shatter under the weight of the tension filling the room, while Charlotte, Alex's sister, watched her with eyes that gleamed with the malicious delight of a predator sensing weakness. Charlotte, whose own marriage was a strategic merger rather than a romantic union, resented Sanaa not for her race, though that was always a silent undercurrent, but for the perceived unearned ease of her life, unaware that the woman pouring her tea could buy and sell the entire Hartman lineage 10 times over without checking her bank balance. I hear Alex is sweating bullets over the capital raise for the Urban Fund, Charlotte said, blowing on her freshly manicured nails as if the conversation were as trivial as the weather, though her tone carried a barbed warning designed to draw blood. I hope you are being sensible, Sanaa, and knowing your place in all of this. The last thing my brother needs right now is domestic friction or you nagging him about household budgets when he is trying to build a legacy. Sanaa placed the teapot down with a deliberate, soft click, lifting her gaze to meet Charlotte's with a smile that was a masterpiece of practiced vacuity, masking the shark-like calculation swimming beneath the surface. I understand completely, Charlotte, she replied, her voice soft and devoid of ego, feeding the other woman exactly the narrative of inferiority she craved. I am just the background, the support system. Alex is the visionary, and I do whatever he tells me to do, because he knows best. Vivian, who had been observing the exchange with the critical eye of a director, ensuring her actors hit their marks, nodded with a satisfied, tight-lipped smile, clearly relieved that the rebellious spark she had sensed at the dinner party had been extinguished by the reality of Alex's dominance. She leaned forward, her demeanor shifting from wary to conspiratorial, eager to cement Sanaa's complicity in the family's survival strategy. Good, Vivian purred, picking up a macaron with delicate, wrinkled fingers. It is a relief to see you finally accepting your role, because this family requires unity, not questions. Incidentally, Damon sent over a few supplementary guarantee documents this morning that needed immediate attention to keep the banks happy. Sanaa felt her heart skip a beat, not out of fear, but out of the thrill of the hunt, as she sensed the trap snapping shut, not on her, but on them. She kept her expression open and naive, tilting her head slightly as if confused by the administrative details. "Oh, I didn't see anything come through my email," she said, baiting the hook with the innocence of a lamb. "It was just procedural nonsense, dear. Nothing you need to worry your pretty little head about." Vivian waved her hand dismissively, oblivious to the fact that she was about to confess to a felony. "Alex signed them on your behalf to save time. It's better that way, isn't it? We didn't want to burden you with reading legal jargon you wouldn't understand, and Damon insisted it was standard practice for a supportive wife to delegate these things." The admission hung in the air, glittering and deadly, a verbal confirmation of the crime that Daniel needed to lock down the case. Sanaa paused for exactly 1 second, allowing the silence to stretch just enough to register as contemplation before she widened her smile, infusing it with a terrifyingly genuine brightness. "Vang! Alex always thinks ahead, doesn't he, Mother?" she said, her use of the Vietnamese affirmative slipping out as a private marker of her true self surfacing. "I trust him absolutely with my name. He can do whatever he thinks is necessary." "That is the attitude that keeps a marriage strong," Vivian declared, satisfied that the matter was settled, turning back to her tea with the smug assurance of a woman who believes she has successfully managed a servant. Under the table, hidden by the heavy linen tablecloth, Sanaa's phone rested on her knee, her fingers moving across the screen with the speed and precision of a pianist playing a requiem. She wasn't trembling. Her hands were steady as she typed the command that would initiate the financial sequence she and Daniel had coded as Protocol Zero. The message was short, brutal, and irrevocable. They just admitted to the forgery on record. Execute the transfer. Pull everything. She pressed send, the action feeling like pulling the pin on a grenade, and as the small, delivered icon appeared on the screen, she looked up at Charlotte and Vivian, who were now discussing the gala guest list, completely unaware that the woman sitting across from them had just effectively bankrupted their empire. The tea tasted like ash, but the victory, cold and secret, tasted sweeter than anything she had ever known, for she was no longer the victim trapped in their narrative. She was the author of their ending, and the ink was already drying on the page. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a masterclass in fragile opulence, a gilded cage where the city's financial predators gathered to feast on canapes and speculation. For Alex Hartman, this was the Colosseum where he would slay the rumors of his insolvency and resurrect his empire on the back of borrowed time and stolen credit. He stood on the raised dais, bathed in the flattering glow of the spotlight, his tuxedo sharp enough to draw blood, while Sanaa stood a step behind him, dressed in a shimmering gown that caught the light like a diamond, silent and decorative. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation, the latter emanating in waves from Alex despite his practiced smile. Behind them, a massive LED screen cycled through architectural renderings of the Hartman Urban Fund's proposed skyscrapers, towering monuments to ego that currently existed only as digital phantoms funded by fraud. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alex's voice boomed through the high-fidelity sound system, warm and charismatic, the perfect pitch of a snake oil salesman believing his own pitch. "They told me this vision was impossible. They told me the capital requirements were too high, the risks too great. But I stand here tonight to tell you that the Hartman Urban Fund is not just a project. It is a promise. And every great man knows that a promise is only as strong as the foundation it is built upon." He turned then, extending a hand towards Sanaa with a flourish that felt more like a command than an invitation. The crowd applauded politely, the sound like dry leaves rustling, waiting for the performance to reach its crescendo. Alex gripped Sanaa's hand, pulling her slightly forward into the light, his fingers digging into her palm with a possessive tightness that warned her to play her part. "And the secret to my success? It is not just strategy, it is support. Unwavering, absolute support. My wife, Sanaa, is not just the heart of our home. She is the silent partner who has pledged her full financial backing to ensure this vision becomes reality. Isn't that right, darling? He thrust the microphone toward her, his eyes locking onto hers with a manic intensity, expecting the submissive nod, the soft affirmation that would seal the con and calm the jittery investors. The room fell silent, waiting for the yes that would validate their checks. Sanaa took the microphone, her grip firm, the cool metal grounding her. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces, at the sharks and the sycophants, and then she looked at Alex, seeing him not as a husband, but as a liability she was about to liquidate. Actually, Sanaa said, her voice steady and amplified to fill every corner of the ballroom, stripping the word of any hesitation. The answer is no. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd, a murmur that sounded like the gathering of a storm. Alex's smile froze, a rictus of panic twitching at the corner of his mouth. "Sanaa," he whispered through gritted teeth, leaning in close, his voice a hiss of pure venom masked as intimacy. "What the hell are you doing? Give me the mic." Sanaa sidestepped him with the grace of a matador evading a clumsy bull, maintaining her position to center stage. She didn't look at him. She looked past him to the control booth where she knew Daniel had just executed the override command. "I need to clarify a critical data point for everyone in this room," she announced, her voice cutting through the rising tension like a scalpel. "My name, Sanaa Ellington, has been used to secure 14 separate guarantee agreements for this fund. I am here to state, on the record, that I have never seen, read, or signed a single one of them." Behind her, the architectural renderings flickered and vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, high-contrast projection of an email chain. The header was unmistakable. From Damon Pierce to Alex Hartman. The subject line read, "Just sign the wife's name. She doesn't know how to read a balance sheet anyway." The gasp from the audience was audible, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Damon, standing near the bar, dropped his glass, the shatter of crystal echoing like a gunshot. "Turn it off," he screamed, lunging toward the AV booth. "Someone kill the feed." But the feed remained, scrolling through bank documents where Sanaa's signature had been clumsily digitally pasted. Alex stood frozen, his world disintegrating in real-time pixels behind him, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost haunting his own funeral. He reached for Sanaa again, desperation making him clumsy. "Sanaa, stop this. We can talk outside." "Leave it!" The voice boomed from the front table, stopping Alex in his tracks. Helena Rhodes stood up, her presence commanding more authority than any security guard. She walked toward the stage, not looking at Alex, but locking eyes with Sanaa. "I want to see it," Helena declared, her voice ringing with the righteous anger of the deceived. "I want to see exactly what a burden looks like." Sanaa turned to face Alex fully now, the screen behind her bathing them both in the harsh blue light of the evidence. She didn't look angry. She looked professional, detached, like an auditor closing a bankrupt account. "You were right about one thing, Alex," she said, her voice soft but amplified into a thunderclap. "I am a burden, because I just removed $750 million from your balance sheet. The weight you're feeling right now? That's gravity." She placed the microphone gently into his limp hand. "Good luck standing on your own." The conference room at Cho and Associates was a glass-walled aquarium suspended 40 stories above Manhattan, a sterile environment designed for the dissection of fortunes and the burial of secrets, where the air was filtered to a chill that discouraged emotional outbursts. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, thick with the silence of a dynasty in mid-collapse, as the remnants of the Hartman family sat across the mahogany expanse from Sanaa, looking less like masters of the universe and more like survivors of a natural disaster. Alex was slumped in his chair, his tie loosened and his eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and the relentless interrogation of federal investigators, while Vivian dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, her composure fracturing under the weight of looming insolvency. Beside them, Charlotte sat rigid, her face a mask of fury that barely concealed her terror, staring at Sanaa with the venomous disbelief of a queen who had just been dethroned by her own handmaiden. Daniel Cho sat at the head of the table, his presence silent and lethal, stacking files with a rhythmic precision that sounded like a ticking clock. But it was Sanaa who commanded the room, sitting perfectly still, her hands clasped on the table, radiating the terrifying calm of an executioner who has already sharpened the blade. Vivian broke the silence first, leaning forward to deploy the weapon she had wielded successfully for decades, the guilt of familial obligation wrapped in the soft cadence of victimhood. "How can you be so heartless, Sanaa?" She wept, the tears flowing on cue as she reached a trembling hand toward the woman she had once scorned. "We are family despite everything. Do you really intend to send your own husband, the man you vowed to love, to a federal prison?" Sanaa watched the performance with the detached interest of an anthropologist observing a primitive ritual, her expression unreadable. "I am not sending him to prison, Mother," she replied, her voice smooth and devoid of the deference she had once feigned. "His own hand did that when he forged my digital signature on 14 counts of bank fraud. I am merely the witness to the crime, not the architect." The rejection of the emotional appeal caused Charlotte to snap, her hands slamming onto the table with a violence that made Alex flinch. "Don't you dare speak to my mother like that," she hissed, abandoning the pretense of civility for the raw, ugly truth of her prejudice. "You think because you got lucky with some inheritance that you can dictate terms to us? You are a guest in this world, Sanaa, a diversity hire in the Hartman narrative. Do you honestly believe the upper crust of New York society will protect a black woman who destroys a prestigious white family? They will close ranks, and you will be left with nothing but your arrogance." Daniel adjusted his glasses, ready to intervene with a legal warning about hate speech and coercion, but Sanaa raised a single hand to stop him, her eyes locking onto Charlotte's with a ferocity that froze the room. She leaned forward, invading Charlotte's personal space across the table, her voice dropping to a register that was razor sharp. "You are right about one thing, Charlotte. Society is prejudiced," Sanaa said, her words landing like blows. "But you have miscalculated the only metric that matters in this room: capitalism. This society loves money far more than it cares about skin color or lineage. And right now, I have $750 million in liquid, unencumbered assets, while you have a mountain of debt, a ruined reputation, and a federal indictment." The number hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room as the Hartmans processed the magnitude of their error. They had treated a whale like a minnow, and now they were being swallowed whole. Sanaa didn't give them time to recover, sliding a thick document across the polished wood toward Alex. "This is the deal," she stated, her tone shifting from combat to business. "It is a plea agreement and a divorce settlement wrapped in one. You will admit to the forgery and absolve me of all liability in the Hartman Urban Fund, and you, Damon, and your mother will accept the dismantling of the estate to pay the creditors." "And if I don't?" Alex whispered, his voice cracking, looking at the document as if it were a death warrant. "Then I join the class action suit as a plaintiff," Sanaa answered, her voice cold and final. "I will use my resources to ensure the prosecution seeks the maximum sentence, and I will sue you civilly for every penny you have left, leaving your mother homeless and your legacy in ashes. Sign the paper, Alex. You are buying your freedom from a 20-year sentence by admitting you are a fraud, or you can keep your pride and rot in a cell." Alex picked up the pen, his hand shaking so violently that the tip scratched against the paper, a sound that echoed in the silence like a scream. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a belated tragic respect. "How long?" he asked, the question barely audible. "How long have you been planning this?" Sanaa stood up, smoothing her skirt, looking down at him not with hate, but with the indifference one feels for a stranger. "Since the moment you told me to apologize for ruining your dinner," she said, watching as he signed his name, surrendering his empire to save his skin. "Since the moment you decided I was a weight to be dragged around. You have what you wanted, Alex. You are free of me." She turned to walk toward the glass doors, stopping only briefly to look back at Vivian, who was sobbing silently into her hands. "Sign the papers, Alex," she added, her final words closing the chapter on her former life. "Don't be a burden to your mother any longer." The passage of time had transformed the scandal of the Hartman collapse from a daily headline into a cautionary footnote in the city's financial history, The debris of their reputation swept away to reveal the clean, sturdy foundation upon which Sanaa was building her new life. Her office, situated in a converted loft in Tribeca, was a sanctuary of light and repurposed wood, a stark architectural rebuttal to the dark mahogany and suffocating velvet that had defined the Hartman estate. Here there were no shadows for secrets to hide in, only floor-to-ceiling windows that welcomed the sun and open spaces that encouraged breath, reflecting the mission of the Phoenix Initiative, the foundation she had established to provide financial literacy and legal defense for women trapped in economic coercion. Sanaa stood by the window, a mug of tea warming her hands, looking down at the street where the rhythm of New York continued, indifferent to the rise and fall of dynasties, her gaze drifting to the flat-screen monitor mounted on the far wall where the local news was playing on mute. The image on the screen was grainy, captured by a paparazzi's long-distance lens. But the figure was unmistakable. Alex Hartman, stripped of his bespoke suits and his arrogance, was wearing the bright orange safety vest of a court-mandated community service crew, spearing trash along the verge of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. He looked thinner, his posture slumped with the exhaustion of manual labor and the crushing weight of public shame. A man who had once believed he held up the sky, now forced to clean the ground beneath it. Sanaa watched him for a long moment, waiting for a surge of vindication or a pang of pity, but she felt neither. The emotional tether that had once bound them had not just been severed, it had dissolved, leaving behind only the neutral observation of a stranger paying a debt. She pressed the remote, the screen fading to black, effectively erasing him from her room and her day, and turned her back on the past just as a soft knock on the frosted glass door signaled the arrival of the present. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Elena, who managed the intake with the ferocity of a lioness, opened the door and stepped aside, revealing a figure that made Sanaa's heart ache with recognition. The woman standing in the doorway looked like a ghost of Sanaa's former self. She was young, perhaps 24, dressed in clothes that were expensive, but worn with the shrinking posture of someone trying to disappear inside them. She clutched a designer handbag to her chest with white-knuckled desperation, as if it contained the only pieces of her identity that hadn't yet been stolen, her eyes darting around the room as though she expected a trapdoor to open beneath her feet. Sanaa didn't retreat behind the imposing oak desk that dominated the center of the room, a barrier she found counterproductive to trust. Instead, she remained standing, offering a soft, encouraging smile that promised safety without demanding immediate speech. "Sanaa?" the assistant said softly. "This is Maya. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said it was an emergency, and I thought you should see her." "Thank you, Elena. That will be all," Sanaa replied, her voice a calm melody in the quiet room. As the door clicked shut, leaving them alone, the silence stretched, heavy and fragile, until Maya took a tentative step forward, her breath hitching in her chest. "My husband," Maya began, her voice trembling so violently the words barely formed, fracturing under the strain of speaking the truth aloud for the first time. "He says I don't understand money. He says the accounts are too complicated for me, that I would just mess them up. He told me. He told me I am a burden if I don't listen to him, that without him I would be on the street." She looked down at her shoes, shame flushing her cheeks. "I don't know where to go. I don't have access to the bank cards anymore." The word burden hung in the air, a poisonous echo that traveled across time to link these two women, and Sanaa felt a flash of cold steel in her spine, not of fear, but of resolve. She walked slowly across the room, moving with the deliberate grace of a woman who owns her space, and bypassed the authority of the desk entirely to pull a simple guest chair closer to where Maya stood. She didn't loom over the girl. She sat down, lowering herself so that when Maya finally lifted her eyes, she would be looking down at Sanaa, a subtle subversion of the power dynamics she was used to. "What is your name?" Sanaa asked, her tone stripping away the formality of a consultation. "Maya," the girl whispered, a tear escaping to trace a path through her impeccable makeup. "Maya, look at me," Sanaa commanded gently, waiting until the girl's tear-filled eyes locked onto hers. She reached out and took Maya's cold, trembling hands in her own, her grip warm and steady, transmitting a current of strength from survivor to survivor. They use that word burden like a weapon. They drape it over our shoulders to keep us bent, to keep us looking at the floor instead of the horizon. They call us burdens because they are terrified of our strength, because they know that if we ever stood up straight, we would tower over them. Maya sniffled, a flicker of confusion and hope warring behind her eyes. "But I don't have any money," she stammered. "He controls everything." "You have more than you think," Sanaa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The voice of a general briefing a soldier before the tide of battle turns. "You have the truth, and now you have me. Do you want to know how much strength you actually possess?" Maya nodded, a small, jerky movement, but it was enough. "Then sit down," Sanaa said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her, not across from her. "We are going to rewrite that definition, right now. You are not a liability on someone else's balance sheet, Maya. You are the asset they are trying to steal." As Maya lowered herself into the chair, her shoulders dropping an inch as the first layer of weight was lifted, the camera of history seemed to pull back, framing the two women in the golden pool of afternoon sunlight. It was a tableau of resurrection, a cycle of abuse being broken by the deliberate application of empathy and resources. Sanaa opened the file on her lap, not the ledger of a victim, but the blueprint of a new life. And as she picked up her pen to begin the intake, the screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of a pen scratching against paper, the sound of a woman writing her own future. And that is how you turn a burden into a legacy. Sanaa didn't just walk away, she rewrote the entire script. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Alex got what he deserved? Or was Sanaa's revenge too cold? Drop your comments below, I read them all. Thank you so much for listening and walking this journey with us. Remember to know your worth and never let anyone else hold the pen to your life story. I'll see you in the next one.